Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Planning Committee of the 15th of January 2025. The first item on the agenda, apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence? Councillor Filmer?
Yeah, we've got apologies from Councillor Barrett and Gilhorn.
Councillor Gilbourne.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mandarakis?
So I am here substituting for Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you. Item 2 is the record of the meeting held on the 18th of December 2024, along with the update and the supplementary agenda approved.
Agreed.
Item 3, I can confirm that there are no items which do not appear on the main agenda. Moving on to item 4 on the agenda, do any members have any disclosable pecuniary interests or other significant interests? Councillor Filmer?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to declare an interest on behalf of the Conservative Group regarding item 7, Arethusa Road. Ex-councillor, Conservative councillor, who we all know, his mother lives in that vicinity, but we have not been lobbied, so we just declare an interest that we know that's the case.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Etheridge.
Thank you very much. In terms of declaration, my standard declaration of sitting on 2 parish councils, but do not take part of any of their planning discussions.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other disclosable interests? Councillor Mandarakis?
So I can't see the item, but on the Selbourne Road item, I will be speaking as a ward councillor, so I'll sit out the discussion and the vote on that.
Okay. So with regards to Councillor Mandarakis speaking as ward member, is that agreed by members? Agreed. Thank you. So now we're going to move on to the first planning application, agenda item 5, which is the planning application for 57 Cambridge Road. We have Margaret Wright with us tonight, the tree consultant, who will be presenting this application. So over to you, Margaret.
Thank you. There we go, right. Tree works application at 57 Cambridge Road for the felling of a large mature oak tree. The tree grows in the front garden on the edge of the drive. It's close to the garage in the left-hand corner of the property. It's shown with the red dot. Whilst there are other trees in influencing distance, this application concerns T1 only, and the committee's decision must focus on the involvement of T1 in isolation. The applicant's engineer confirms subsidence at the property. Level monitoring supplied by the applicant shows seasonal movement, confirming the involvement of tree roots. Soil desiccation shows the clay soil's potential for movement. Desiccation is confirmed in trail holes 1 and 2. This soil drying and subsequent movement has led to cracking on the front and rear left-hand corners. So where the soil is dry, the building can't support the weight of the building under load, and it slides. In terms of the visibility of the tree, it can be seen for some distance up and down Cambridge Road, and therefore the removal of the tree will lead to harm to the character and appearance of the local area. This can be somewhat compensated for by replacement planting, which the committee could condition, but it would be decades before the loss of the tree is fully mitigated by any replacement. And it is worth noting that any replacement wouldn't be protected by the same tree preservation order. A new order would have to be made once that tree establishes. If the application is refused, the relevant TPO regs allow for the applicant to claim compensation from the council, and whilst there are limitations to this right, the compensation could be payable for any remedial works that would otherwise be unnecessary if the trees were removed, such as underpinning of the property, disruption to the household, and associated costs of alternative housing while the works go on, and it can include diminution in land value. The committee has the authority to approve or refuse the application and decide whether retention of this mature oak, in light of its visibility and environmental value, outweighs the financial risk to the council and whether the loss of the tree is proportionate. I think that sums it up from my perspective. So if the committee have any questions, I'm happy to.
Thank you, Margaret. I now open the floor to members. Any members? Councillor Golvin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Whilst I think we'd all agree that trees really do contribute to our urban environment, they provide a cooling effect in hot weather. They're visually nice. They're home to all sorts of small wildlife. But when you've got a large tree very, very close to a property like this, there's often problems that can be caused. And I think even if the council was not liable to pay the compensation, I would
Sorry, can you put your microphone on, please? Thank you.
Right. My view on this is, had the council not been liable for any costs involved, I would have still been very sympathetic to the residents and would be prepared to have the tree removed. Having said that, though, I think we should have some sort of principle that if we're going to take a tree away, we should have another one planted. Obviously, to plant it in the same spot or close by, you'd probably end up with the same problem in a few years' time. But I'd like to see another tree planted in the vicinity, either an open space or a park that's near there, and if that could be done in consultation with the local members. Because I think it's quite important that we do value our trees here in Medway. They're an important part of our ecosystem. And if as in this case, that it is best that the tree is removed, I think we should have a abiding principle that we should have the tree replaced. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Yeah, take those points on board, but it's a difficult one because the tree was probably there before the bungalow was built. Therefore, they should have known that that would cause problems moving forward. So, anyway, Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairperson. The amenity value of this 150-year-old mature oak tree is significant. It's a good size and form. It can be seen, as mentioned, from most of Cambridge Road in both directions. And importantly, it can also be seen and enjoyed from the public alleyway running alongside the property. You can walk along it and look up and admire the tree quite close. So I can understand why a tree preservation order exists on this tree in the first place. There's also, I believe, a smaller oak tree in the front garden of the neighbouring property at number 59, but there's no application to fell that tree due to any alleged subsidence, which I think is an interesting situation. Unlike applications to fell oak trees in my own ward, the applicant hasn't provided any photographs showing the alleged subsidence, such as cracks in walls. There are photographs for applications in my ward, similar applications, but there's no photographs here. So the visual evidence to justify felling this oak tree doesn't exist. Also, unlike applications in my own ward, there's no DNA evidence provided by the applicant linking this specific tree in question to the alleged subsidence. The evidence provided and justification to fell this oak tree is poor, to say the least. Also, the engineering appraisal report makes interesting reading. The level of damage is regarded as slight and is only classified as Category 2 in accordance with the BRE assessment of damage in low-rise buildings. To put that into some form of context, there are 6 categories of damage, 0 being negligible with no action required, and 5 being structural damage requiring a major repair job. So this is in the lower end of damage on the spectrum. Category 2, the category in question, is cracks easily filled up to 5 millimetres and cracks that are not visible externally. An application to fell some oak trees in my own ward describes the damage as Category 3. These oaks are much further away from the property compared to this oak tree in the property this evening. In other words, the oak tree in question this evening is causing less damage despite being closer to the property concerned. Surprisingly, there's also an admission in the engineering report in front of us this evening that the foundations of the property have been built at a relatively shallow depth onto shrinkable clay subsoil. So it appears to me that the applicant will need to do some work to their foundations anyway, regardless if this oak tree survives or is removed because of inadequate construction. This isn't the fault of the existing tree, which was, of course, there first. The soil around Hoo, for example, is clay, and developers building in Hoo have had to put in significant foundations to compensate for the clay soil, which notoriously shrinks and expands. I have first-hand difficulty with this type of soil at my allotment. Clay also becomes incredibly hard in the summer and incredibly wet in the winter. To compensate for this, development on clay includes drainage systems, and nearby trees are planted to stabilise the soil and to control the water content specifically. Oak trees are very thirsty and can absorb around 400 litres of water a day. If this oak tree is removed, the applicant is likely to encounter what is known as heave, where the clay soil expands due to the increase in water contents, potentially causing more damage to the property compared to if the oak tree had remained. With the admission of the property's poor foundations and the likely risk of heave, I believe felling this oak tree is not the silver bullet to the applicant's problems. Regarding the potential liability of costs against the council, if the applicant is successful, and I reiterate successful, the worst case scenario for the council is repair costs up to £75,000. As stated in the report, the caveat value of the oak tree is £77,500. Therefore, just using this metric alone and on balance, the oak tree should remain. It is said that an oak tree takes 300 years to grow, 300 years to live, and 300 years to die. The report states that the oak tree is reasonably expected to live for another 100 years. I believe the oak tree will live longer, and it will, of course, outlive everyone here today. The oak tree will go on benefiting the residential amenity and local environment for many generations to come. The oak is unique. It's not like any other native tree species in Britain. A single oak tree benefits 2,300 wildlife species according to the Woodland Trust. 326 species specifically depend on the oak for their own survival. Felling this oak tree is short-termism to benefit man. There will be long-term implications and significant harm to the natural world if this oak tree is removed. Medway Council declared a climate emergency in 2019 and promised to provide the local community with a green and clean future. Felling this tree, specifically because it's an oak, would fly in the face of this promise to local people. Our planet is literally on fire, literally. The ice is melting. As a result, some now want to get their hands on natural resources in Greenland. Although this is just one single oak tree in Rainham, in our part of the world, small actions such as felling this tree all add up and have caused the situation we find ourselves in today with the climate. I won't be supporting the felling of this beautiful oak because it's completely not justified. The evidence supporting the application is poor, non-existent, and removing the oak tree won't solve the problem the applicant faces, particularly due to the foundations of the property being poor from the outset and the likelihood of heave and clay swelling if the oak tree is removed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Is there anything you wanted to come back on that, Margaret, or not? You don't need to. I didn't know if you had any comments to make.
No, Councillor Pearce summed that up pretty well, actually. It is a horrible argument to be having. I don't envy the committee's decision because this is an argument that comes down to what price you put on your environment. And there are other trees involved in the damage. The evidence for the application is imperfect, but after 20 plus years of working on subsidence cases in the southeast, I've never seen a perfect application, and we're not looking at reasonable doubt, we're looking at balance of probabilities. There's a difference, unfortunately for the tree. I think that is it, apart from heave. Heave, I've only seen 2 cases in the past 20 plus years, but where they have occurred, they have been disastrous, and we're talking about full demolition of a building. The tree clearly predates the property, but we can't be looking at whether the foundations are appropriate or meet current building standards. This is, the damage to the building wouldn't have occurred had it not been for the presence of this tree and or others nearby. I think, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, no, thank you. The other thing I was going to say, next door you've got the oak tree as well. That also has the potential of damaging that property too, doesn't it? So we could be back at planning committee with another tree making this decision, because it's not actually evidence that it's 110% this tree that is causing the problem.
No, it's not. There is another oak tree in the adjacent garden that isn't even put on the arboricultural report plan. But as I've said before, a lot of these, to provide evidence for a subsidence application, and the applicant has provided everything that they've been asked to do, to provide evidence is an extremely expensive process, extremely expensive. And in most cases, it comes off of their insurance excess, depending on the level, but it's thousands of pounds worth of information that's been put forward. A lot of the times it's handed to a claims company and they go for a low-cost report that sometimes they miss things off. There are trees at the back that are within influencing distance. So yeah, Councillor Pearce is exactly right. It is not a silver bullet, and we may well be back here looking at the same thing in a few months' time, but we have to look at the application in front of us. That's why I said to start with isolation, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Margaret. Any other member? Councillor Peake.
Thank you, Chair. When I first looked at that, my initial reaction was, no way, because I love trees. I think it's one of the great blessings of Mother Nature. They're very attractive. But as already been pointed out, they do actually provide a service and water retention, shade, as Councillor Garvin said. Sometimes it can be the opposite, of course. They can be a blight on your amount of light to your property. The contradictory, though, is if it was my property and I thought there was any chance that this tree was causing damage, I may well be totally double standard and think I want it removed. So it's a dilemma for me. I'm a little bit curious, or is it me? We're looking at 3.6. It says moisture abstraction from tree roots is considered the primary cause of damage, and whether or not leaking drains or shallow foundations will have contributed to damage is irrelevant. Surely it's not irrelevant if we're trying to ascertain how much damage has been caused by the tree. It says soil drying would not have occurred but for the presence of nearby trees. So sorry if I'm being stupid, but I'm now confused about, are we absolutely saying quite clearly this tree is definitely causing damage? Presumably there's been a survey. I've had a similar issue, by the way, to property I own in Frinton, so I've got some idea about this, and it's not that straightforward. Is it absolutely clear that it is the tree that's causing this damage? If so, then I'm inclined to, unfortunately, agree to have it removed. But I do like the suggestion that Councillor Garvin said about a replacement tree. Is there any protocol for this? Any precedence for insisting that there's a tree? If so, how much? Who pays for it? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Margaret, did you want to come back?
There are all sorts of things that can go wrong with foundations of the property that cause cracking. The engineer, and we have to take it on faith because Councillor Pearce is quite right, no actual physical evidence has been provided. The soil wouldn't show desiccation as it's got on the geotechnical report. You have to, it's stupidly technical. I can explain it after if you need to, but it's the dry soil not being able to hold the load, and they take a little bit out and test it under lab conditions, and it is desiccation. This wouldn't have happened had it not been for tree roots taking moisture out of the soil. So the drying has to be from tree roots taking moisture out of the soil. There are roots of this oak or an oak in the area, and this one is the closest one. So sort of guilty by association, I'm afraid. The replacement tree can be conditioned, and that would be paid for by the applicant and maintained.
Thank you. Councillor Filmer?
Yeah, thank you, Chairperson. I agree with everyone. It's very difficult. I mean, we all love trees. Oak trees are special. But unfortunately, for my sins, I've done quite a bit of underpinning on properties over the years. And when you do the soil tests and you look at the soil, the way it's dried out, it's the fibrous roots that cause all the problem. Back in the day, the depth of the footings wouldn't be up to the standard that you're doing now. Now, when we do soil tests, we end up doing piling on the housing before we build them. If the tree's not removed, when they do the underpinning, they do something called a hit and miss system, where you go a lot deeper than the 500 that they're saying that footings are down at the moment. You probably go about another metre under that. But if you've still got the fibrous roots there, that will come down and dry the soil out. And the clay it goes like a fine sandy sort of thing. So unfortunately, I would have to go on the side of removing the tree, I'm afraid.
Any other member? No. Okay, so there are two options as laid out in the agenda. I now move to the Vice Chair. Over to you, Councillor Jones.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. It's a very difficult decision. So paragraph 111, it says the committee approves the application to remove the tree with or without a condition to replace it. In light of the officer comments, unless there's legally any reason why I can't, I'd like to suggest that we amend that to remove the tree with a condition to replace it and put that to the vote.
Over to you, Dave.
Chair, apologies for coming in here. We're currently working on a new tree policy, so it's not been adopted as yet. But reflecting on the climate change crisis that we've agreed in Medway, the policy as it's evolving will be if a tree has to be felled, it's replaced by 2 trees. So I think maybe it's something members might want to think about rather than a condition to replace it with 1 tree, maybe replace it with 2 trees.
Chair, I'm happy to move that and see if it finds favour with the committee. So the recommendation would now agree that the committee approve the application to remove the tree with a condition to replace it by 2 trees.
Is that seconded?
Seconded.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. Those for?
That's 9, Chair.
Those against?
That's 2, Chair.
The application is therefore approved.
Was it 3? Sorry.
Oh, 3, yeah, 3. So now we're moving on to agenda item 6, planning application Morgan Timber Knight Road. Amanda Barnes, principal planner, will be presenting this application. So over to you, Amanda.
Thank you, Chair. This application is at Morgan Timber in Knight Road in Strood. The site is shown here in red, with additional land owned by the applicant shown in blue. The application is for outline planning permission with some matters reserved, appearance, landscaping, layout and scale, for the demolition of the existing buildings and structures, and for the construction of up to 168 residential dwellings, the provision of vehicular, cycle and pedestrian access, public open spaces, sustainable drainage systems, landscaping, infrastructure, earthworks and all other associated works. The application site comprises a brownfield site, approximately 4.31 hectares in size, shown in red here. The Medway Valley rail line forms the western boundary of the site here, beyond which is an area of industrial and commercial use developed during the 1980s, through here. To the east of the site is the River Medway. Within the mudflats lie a boatyard, a collection of residential boathouses and additional land owned by the applicant. This photo shows the current access to the site with the River Medway to the left of the photo. This photo is taken from inside the site looking back towards Walnut Tree Bridge and Knight Road. This slide shows the current access to the site from Walnut Tree Bridge. Walnut Tree Bridge currently provides the only access, both vehicular and pedestrian, to the site from Knight Road. As part of the planning application, this access would become a secondary access to the site. This slide shows the existing site plan with the building shown in purple. This is the Walnut Tree Bridge access here. The site is currently occupied by an independent timber merchant that is winding down their operation and in the process of vacating the site. There are several buildings and existing areas of hard standing within the site, which have been used for the storage and manufacturing of timber products. These slides show the current buildings on the site. To the south of the site is a residential development called Temple Woods, which is being under construction by a major house builder. The proposed principal access to the Morgan site will be from the neighbouring development. This slide shows the view looking out of the site towards the River Medway. The illustrative master plan has been set out with 168 units in a mix of 2, 2.5 and 3-storey housing in the form of flats and individual houses. Areas of public open space are indicated to the east of the site, bordering the river, including a pedestrian and cyclist route. A play space is shown located centrally on the site. Connections into the site will be from a secondary access existing under Walnut Tree Bridge here, with the primary access from a spine road linking the site to Phase 1B of the Temple waterfront development here. Within the local plan, this site is part of a wider allocation under Policy S10, Strood Waterfront Action Area, as well as the Housing Policy H1, New Residential Development. The application site forms part of the 2006 Temple Waterfront Development Brief, a parcel of land some 27 hectares in size, outlined here all the way around in white. Application site shown here in orange. This site was the subject of an outline planning permission for up to 620 dwellings and other development that was approved in December 2011. This slide shows the phases approved under the outline consent. Phase 1A, 1B, application site and Phase 2. This is Temple Marsh. Phase 1A and 1B have been granted reserve matters consent, with Phase 1A completed under construction. This image shows as you enter the site, whilst Phase 1B is currently under construction. This slide shows the approved layout of Phase 1B, with Morgan's timber site here and the access I showed previously here. This slide shows the approved plan for the 2009 outline application. The outline consent has since lapsed, and therefore it is no longer possible to submit further reserve matters applications pursuant to it. As you can see on the slide, the wider site had more areas of residential in here, and a total of 620 units were approved, together with employment and commercial areas, which are the different colours. Of the 620 residential units originally granted outline consent at Temple Waterfront, only 364, some 59%, have been granted consent via reserve matters and are currently being delivered in phases 1A and 1B. 1A, 1B. Subsequent applications altered the original outline consent and removed the employment and commercial elements from the scheme. The current application would see the delivery of up to 168 dwellings, which would take the delivery of dwellings at Temple Waterfront to 532 units. This is 86% of the total number set out in the original outline application. A commercial needs assessment has been submitted with the current application, which demonstrates that there is currently sufficient retail and leisure provision in and around the site. It also sets out that the site is not considered to be suitable for office development, and is not a town centre location and does not benefit from direct rail connections, unlike other town centre sites. The needs assessment therefore justifies the departure from the approach in the development brief that sought retail, leisure and employment uses on the wider site. Medway Council is currently unable to demonstrate a 5-year supply of deliverable housing sites. In view of this deficit, the Council's housing supply policies are considered out of date in the context of housing allocations. The site is considered to be in a sustainable location in line with the National Planning Policy Framework, the NPPF, being located on the edge of Strood, approximately 1 mile from Strood railway station, and around a 15-minute walk from the town centre to the north, up here. In addition to this, the nearest bus stops are located on Priory Road, approximately a 7-minute walk from the site. The provision of housing in an area that is currently experiencing a shortfall, together with the reuse of a previously developed site, are both benefits of the proposal and in line with the NPPF. The principle of housing on this site is therefore considered acceptable. This slide shows the proposed master plan, in here, set next to the approved Phase 1B layout, here. A variety in size and shape of plots are shown, with detached, semi-detached terrace and apartments distributed through the site. The layout shows the provision of a network of cycle, footways and pedestrian-focused spine road to the existing phases of development at Temple Waterfront, connections through here and here, together with new footways and cycleways through the site to the surrounding areas. Due to the outline nature of the application, detailed hard and soft landscaping will be dealt with at the reserve matters stage. However, the illustrative landscape master plan shows how a number of measures, including hard and soft landscape features, areas of amenity public open space, and tree-lined streets could be incorporated into the design. This strategy is considered to complement phases 1A and 1B of Temple Waterfront and the prevailing character of the area. The proposed layout will ensure that access can be provided to the area of green space to the southeast known as Temple Marsh, through here. A small parking area, here, with roadside parking, has also been shown on the illustrative master plan, which can be utilised by both visitors to the development as well as dog walkers and other visitors using this green space and the Temple Marsh's open space. A condition is recommended to secure this. Overall, the illustrative layout shows that the Reserve Matters application could respond appropriately to the requirements of the provisions of the local plan and NPPF. The illustrative master plan has been designed to allow all the dwellings to achieve the required nationally described space standards, together with achieving minimum garden lengths and acceptable privacy and outlook distances. Concern has been raised about the impact on the residents of Castleview Moorings, in here, due to the impact of the comings and goings from the secondary entrance to the site at Walnut Tree Bridge, here. While it is noted that there will be cars accessing and exiting the site from this access, it is a secondary access, and it is not considered to be so significant as to refuse permission due to the fact that when the timber yard was in full operation, this was the sole access for the timber yard, where cars from staff members and lorry delivery materials would have been using this access. The site is directly adjacent to the Marine Estuary Conservation Zone of the River Medway. The submitted information has satisfactorily assessed the impact of the footprint of the proposed development and has provided information to demonstrate that the appropriate measures will be implemented to avoid impacts on these habitats. Information has also been submitted detailing measures to reduce the impact of the proposal on the river and adjacent sites. In alignment with the NPPF, the submitted information has detailed that the proposal will achieve a measurable biodiversity net gain, although it must be noted this application came in prior to that need. The site is set within flood zones 2 and 3, which are medium and high risk according to the Environment Agency mapping. However, the proposal includes raising land and finished floor levels, with all developments set above the designed flood level. This will ensure the safety from potential flooding of the proposed residential properties. Access to the site would also be maintained at a raised level, which is considered acceptable. The 2009 approved outline permission at the wider Temple waterfront site, of which Morgan Timber site comprised the north-eastern parcel, was consented on the basis that a signals arrangement would be introduced at the Walnut Tree Bridge. Phase 1A and 1B are understood to have access rights over the Morgan Timber site to access Walnut Tree Bridge as a secondary vehicular link and to provide active travel links to the north-east supermarkets and Strood town centre. During the course of the application, there have been extensive discussions surrounding access from Walnut Tree Bridge due to concerns with regard to highway and pedestrian safety. Through the course of the discussions, it was highlighted that Walnut Tree Bridge is already used by pedestrians, including dog walkers, residents of the phases that have been built out, pedestrians accessing the yacht club, and Morgan Timber employees. To ensure that a workable solution could be found, plans of the signal arrangements to a detailed design level, supported by capacity analysis, a Stage 2 road safety audit, and new technical note have been received. While it is not typical for this level of detail to be afforded to a scheme prior to determination, it was considered necessary to have as much detail and information as possible in order to review the signal arrangements and consider both safety and viability. The key outstanding issue with this arrangement is the lack of adequate provision for visually impaired pedestrians. This lack of adequate provision contravenes design standards and can be seen to breach the Equality Act of 2010. However, it's also important to weigh this departure from standards against the potential benefits offered by the development and by this access arrangement. Given that this link is already used by pedestrians, it is considered that the proposed signals arrangement will constitute a safety improvement in terms of provision for the existing users. The removal of the employment use of Morgan Timber and its associated heavy vehicle movements similarly will have a benefit for pedestrians using this route. For visually impaired pedestrians who may already use this link, the signals constitute a safety improvement. The arrangement may be non-standard, but providing further efforts are undertaken to raise awareness of the layout and improvements can be made to nearby links to better accommodate these pedestrians, it is considered overall a net benefit. It's considered that improvements to the pedestrian footway on Knight Road should be incorporated as part of the development package secured through part of a Section 278 agreement. It is already established that the preference realistically would be widening the arch to enable vehicles and pedestrians to travel safely beneath. However, the prohibitive cost of this sort of work on network rail structures makes this unfeasible. Policy H3 of the local plan sets out a requirement for 25% of new housing within Temple waterfront site to be affordable. A financial viability statement has been submitted as part of the application to assess the viability of development. The report concluded that it would not be viable to provide affordable housing and full Section 106 costs as part of the proposal, given the significant abnormal costs associated with delivering the scheme, due to the fact the site is brownfield land requiring various remediation work to occur prior to commencement of development. The site also requires land levels to be raised due to tidal flood risk from the River Medway. These measures, along with current market conditions, mean that the viability report has shown it is not viable to provide affordable dwellings on this site. However, officers will work with potential developers and registered providers to consider the possibility of delivering affordable housing outside the planning process, potentially using Homes England grant. The applicant's viability report has been reviewed extensively by the Council's independent assessor. This has set out that a viable scheme is one that includes 100% housing for sale, no affordable housing, and Section 106 contributions totalling £2,730,674. This amount does fall short of the total level of Section 106 requests by £172,125.57. As such, not all contribution requests have been able to be facilitated as set out in the committee report. The Section 106 will include a clawback clause so that if the developer makes a greater profit than anticipated, this will then be used for additional Section 106 infrastructure payments. In summary, the site is considered to be in a sustainable location and the development of the site for housing is in accordance with policies H1, S1 and S10 of the local plan, where the development strategy for the plan area is to prioritise reinvestment in the urban fabric, including the redevelopment and recycling of underused and derelict land within the urban area. In addition to this, the brownfield first approach was an important aspect in the preferred option in the recent Reg 18B consultation and reflects general public consensus and also the government's preferred approach in the recent NPPF revisions. This will also assist in resisting potential speculative applications on greenfield sites which may not be generally supported through the local plan process. The development is in outline form with all matters except access reserved for future consideration. However, it has been shown on the indicative plans that the housing could fit onto the site without causing demonstrable harm to the character of the local area, amenity or issues with regard to the highway network, and as such is considered to be in accordance with policies in the local plan and the NPPF. It's therefore recommended that planning permission is granted, subject to the conditions set out, together with the minor amendments in the supplementary agenda and a Section 106 agreement. Thank you for listening to the very long presentation.
Thank you, Amanda. I now open the floor to members. Any members? Councillor Hammond-Eshay.
Well, thank you very much for that very detailed presentation. And yes, we do need a lot more houses. I've got two real questions that I need to be addressed. One is around the secondary access point. Are we confident that all avenues have been explored to make that more accessible? Because currently, as it was used before for the timber merchants, yes, it was heavy-duty vehicles. Making it more residential in terms of the access point, you could have situations where you need a bit more safety measures and traffic calming mechanisms put in place. The second question was to do with the 106 contributions. How will we confirm that the developer has made, I'm talking about honesty and transparency here, their estimated profits, their costs, and then come out with a statement to say whether or not they can contribute more to the 106. What sort of mechanisms do we have to hold them to account beforehand instead of publishing the data 2, 3, 5 years down the line? Thank you.
Taking your first point, I have been involved in lengthy, protracted discussions about the access. We have really gone back to the developer time and time again, asking for more and more information. They have explored every option that I think is available, and this is the solution they've come up with. It's actually a signals arrangement whereby, perhaps my colleague, the highways consultant, can explain it better than me, but there's different arms to the signals so that each arm will move independently, allowing a pedestrian phase and then phases for cars. It's a very non-standard setup, but it is the only way forward. And it must be known that with the outline consent, this was always put in there as a secondary access. So when that scheme was approved in 2011, although we didn't have this level of detail, it was always in there to be the secondary access to the site. Stephen, have you got something to add?
How do I work the mic would be the first point.
You're on.
Brilliant, thank you. I don't think I have anything else to add. I think you've outlined how the signals will operate. Any vehicles entering the site will get a dedicated phase. Any vehicles exiting the site will get a dedicated phase, and it will all be vehicle or pedestrian actuated as well. So there's the amount of work, as you say, that has been done is significant.
Right, thank you. Oh, yes, sorry, Amanda, did you want to come back?
Chair, thank you very much. Just going back on that first point, I think those of us who know the site for decades and decades and decades will know that access, up until relatively recently, served Molly's Car Breakers, served Castleview Boatyard, also served the Morgan's Timber Yard, and there was a significant amount of movement through there. as Amanda and Stephen have said, whilst this is non-standard, significant safety improvements will be secured through via this. And also it helps to make the development sustainable because it enables the residents from phase 1A and phase 1B, as well as this proposal, to get safely, pedestrian-wise, through to Strood Town Centre and also to the bus services that Amanda has referred to. In relation to your second point, Councillor Hammond-Ishii, which is about the clawback and the Section 106, this is quite a common thing now in terms of these clawbacks where you get the viability assessments which justify at that point in time the reduction. There are various ways of working out a formula for that clawback. That will all be incorporated into the Section 106.
Sure, can I just come back very quickly? Just onto the secondary access point, you described the provisions that you got in place as new, innovative, and all those types of things. In terms of the risks for drivers to be aware of these new measures you put in place, what are you doing to ensure drivers understand what they mean? Because for where we are, it can be very simple. It's going to face two ways, whether you're pedestrian or your vehicle. But when you're in the car, it could be something different. Has this arrangement been deployed anywhere else in the UK? And if so, how can you raise awareness to drivers? Thank you.
Stephen, did you want to come back on that?
I'm not aware of anywhere where this particular arrangement has been deployed previously, but it will operate as traffic signals, and that's a standard operation, so people will be used to stopping at a red signal and going on a green signal. It won't be any more complicated than that.
Right, thank you. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairperson. Last month, this committee approved an application on the Civic Centre site where we had a situation where we had to decide whether we wanted affordable housing or Section 106 contributions. Both this site and the Civic Centre site are brownfield sites, both are difficult sites to develop. So I'm just wondering why, on this application, the recommendation is to go with the Section 106 rather than the affordable housing, because there was a debate and discussion about affordable housing being the priority over everything. So why is it different here? And also, I'm interested in this clawback clause on profits, because I think that would have been quite useful if we had that in place. I don't know if it is in place for the Civic Centre site. Those are my questions, just to see why there's a different approach on this one compared to what we literally just decided on last month. Thank you.
Chair, thank you very much. If that's okay. There is no difference. I think in relation to the Civic Centre site, there will be affordable homes delivered on site by the council, and that will be secured outside of the planning process. I think if I recall, there was no Section 106 on that, so it wasn't that there was a choice between one of the two. The viability showed it wasn't viable with Section 106 or affordable homes, but similar to this one, we are going to be securing affordable homes outside the planning process. In relation to the clawback, I think the difference is the landowner, the developer. If there is any additional profit in relation to the Civic Centre site, and it's a very costly site, well, of course, the council will be using that money to improve services in that area in Medway generally. But the clawback is a standard clause that we now use on Section 106s where there are viability assessments.
Thank you. Councillor Filmer.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this scheme is an excellent scheme, and I really appreciate the work you've put into this. You've been very thorough on this. So you've answered a lot of questions regarding the little bridge that, as Dave said, we've all known for years, and it's always been a problem. And I think doing what we're going to do with the lights solves that problem. The development itself, being a brownfield site, there's always going to have to be compromises on these brownfield sites with the decontamination and the different bits and pieces. But when this is done, you've got a lovely view across the river. It's going to be a nice development, so I'm fully behind it.
Thank you. Councillor Golvin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the officer for such a detailed report. There is a little bit more history I'd like to bring to the attention of colleagues, if you look at the aerial photograph, which is the extract from the Temple Waterfront Development Brief 2006, it shows two areas marked as the Temple Marsh open space and former karting track. Those are actually in the ownership of the council. And the council did look about 10 years ago whether it was possible to build on that land. It was possible to build on that land, but the costs involved would have been prohibitive because it's a former landfill site and it would have to have been capped, and there had to have been a system put in to deal with the gas that's still being generated from the landfill underneath. And because that land was then sort of not being able to build on, it was decided we used as open space. My understanding was that a payment was made by the developers of certainly the first two bits towards the open space, because they were able to build to a higher density than they would have done had that open space not existed. So the council received a sum for that. I'm just wondering, does that same agreement apply to the ex-Morgan Timbers site? Because my understanding at the time it would have done, that they would have been allowed to build to a higher density had it been an isolated site. So I've just wondered if officers could check that that payment, if it is due, is coming to the council. Other than that, I'd like to agree with my colleague. I think this is going to be a good scheme. It's bringing a brownfield site into use. You know, we have a daunting task to try and find the amount of homes that we are supposed to provide, and this will make quite a good contribution towards that. Yes, it would have been nice if we could have had some affordable in there, but the practicalities of dealing with brownfield sites, I think members are quite familiar with, and I think at the end of the day, it's better to have some building than none at all, because at least it's going to help us to get to those figures that we need, and it also increases the housing supply in Medway, which helps to keep the cost of the properties down a bit. So I think this is going to be a good scheme. I think it's a good site, and I would hope all members feel they can back it, because this is a really good use of a piece of land which is no longer suitable for industrial use. If they put in an application for another commercial use on the site, I think it would have been a lot more difficult to be able to support. So, to me, this is the best way forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Dave, did you want to come back on that?
Chair, thank you very much. Councillor Govin's memory is entirely correct. When they were moving forward with the development brief on this site, there were three landowners there. I think it was Blue Circle, or a previous iteration of Blue Circle, Morgan's, and the council. Looking forward to bring development on the site. But the majority of the open space to which the residential parts would benefit was on council land. So what you had was a tripartite agreement, effectively an equalisation, so that those who had the most residential were paying a contribution to the council, effectively, because all the open space is on the council land, to deliver that open space for which they would benefit. So there is that contribution. My colleague Peter Garrett in Green Space Services has worked up a plan for the delivery of that open space. And that did include Morgan's, who on their land had a bit of residential as well as a business use. Because they are, as part of this application, stopping the business use part and having further residential, you'll see that in addition there's a section 106 on here, so there's further funding towards the delivery of that open space. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Councillor Etheridge.
Thank you, and once again, thank you very much for that detailed report. I'd like to pick up two items, if I may, regarding the traffic lights under the bridge. can we ensure that the traffic lights for traffic coming from Knights Road is permanently on green unless somebody else resets it? Simply because the people who know the area know how bad the traffic gets there, especially at the weekends for Morrison's and all the other industrial site and other shopping centres down there. And secondly, for 106 money, don't quite understand why we're putting an education centre at Temple Marsh. At the Temple, especially as we, as a council, intending to sell it, and the amount of times it's open is pretty minimal. So to me, that seems to be a waste of 106 money.
All right, thank you. Now we'll go over to Councillor Mandarakis.
So, for all the reasons that have been outlined, it does seem to be an ideal site. But I just wondered around the bus routes. So my understanding of that bus route, and it is from a few years ago, is that the buses run really infrequently. It's like 2 a day. So I wondered if there was plans to update that, or if it could have updated in the last couple of years, but I just wondered if that had been spoken about.
Amanda, do you want to come back on that? Thank you.
So originally on the outline consent, there was meant to be a bus service entering the site. During the course of the development and the build out of phase 1A, it was removed. That was actually one of the conditions on the site, where a bus would travel through. It didn't come forward. It's been agreed that that's acceptable not to happen. It's really unfortunate because we are where we are now, that the roads are too narrow and we can't now get a bus through the site. You're correct, I don't think the bus services are great, but there is a contribution towards highways that has been sought as part of the Section 106. I'm not sure whether some of that might be being used towards sustainable transport, but that is something that can be looked at.
Can that be looked at with bus companies just to see if they can improve? Because I think it's New Venture, isn't it? It's not Arethusa. Arethusa does the top part of Strood, and then New Venture or something does that. So that can be discussed with the companies themselves to...
I'm not sure that I've got anything specifically on that, no. Sorry.
Okay. Dave's just going to come back on Councillor Etheridge's point now.
Chair, thank you very much. Councillor Etheridge rightly points out on page 55 the list of the contributions that were asked for by the various services. Because of the viability assessment, there isn't the money to meet all those contributions. So what is set out on page 23 and 24 are the contributions that we as officers think are pertinent or most appropriate within the money that's available. And for a number of reasons, including those that Councillor Etheridge has set out, I decided that the contribution requested towards the new facilities block, toilets, education space at Temple Marsh, shouldn't be included. So that's not in the recommendation, Councillor Etheridge.
Thank you. Councillor Myton.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, and I suspect because it used to be a timber yard and had deliveries, that this should, in theory, shouldn't be a problem. Can a fire engine get through that secondary access? Is it big enough?
Yeah, it has been tracked, and a fire engine and other heavy vehicles can access it, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Field.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Mandarakis actually stole most of my thunder there. But I do note that there's £700,000 for sustainable transport, so I would certainly hope our public transport team are working, probably ASD, for the service that goes to Medway Valley, and with the bus service improvement plan, that actually we're really looking to use some of that funding, some of this funding, to really boost that service for that area as well as serving these properties as an urgent priority. I just want to go back to the access, and again, you alluded that you probably did consider this option, but I just wanted to be a bit more thorough on it. Is there any way that we can prevent the residential property accessing the secondary access for reasons to make it safe, make it safer for the walking and cycling access, but also B, the issue that Councillor Etheridge noted in terms of potential blocking back onto Knights Road, Is that part of it, so that, for instance, it would be an emergency access, only access towards the residential site and access to the active businesses that are here? Because I think that would significantly reduce the amount of cars going through that, given the fact that it's 3 sites going through. And the other point with the arrangement is lighting also considered in that, because obviously it's very dark at the moment, so we would want sufficient street lighting for pedestrians and vulnerable road users to be able to walk underneath that bridge.
I believe that a lighting survey has been undertaken, and the intention of this access is a secondary access. There will be significant traffic calming in place to deter users, and particularly to deter rat running through the site. And also the traffic modelling has been undertaken as part of the transport assessment, in which the trip generation both to and from the site has also been considered, and that's shown that the traffic signal control operates to a good degree with a good amount of reserve capacity left for the junction operation.
Thank you. Any other member? Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairperson. I was just looking at the Section 106s themselves, as I've mentioned it previously. I'm glad that the 28,000 to Great Lines has been removed, the Metropolitan Park, whatever that is. So that's great. There's also, as highlighted, there's a very healthy contribution towards sustainable transport, 705,000, which is 4,200 per property, which is good. I'd like to see that across the board with all applications. That'd be quite impactful. I was initially concerned with that access, with that, literally it's like a tunnel, but as it's been explained, there's going to be traffic lights and a lot of safety measures in place. And with the 700,000 on top to try and make access sustainable generally, I'm quite happy to support the Section 106 contributions, notwithstanding the fact there's no affordable housing on this application for the points I've mentioned previously. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Any other member? No, thank you, members, for all your comments. As has been mentioned a few times now, it is very disappointing and frustrating with regards to not having the affordable housing. But as we know, it costs more to build on brownfield, and then they've got the extra expense of raising the land levels due to the risk of flooding from the River Medway. But hopefully officers, Dave and his officers, will be able to find affordable housing through a different way. So I now go over to Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Just before I move the recommendations, that was necessarily quite a long presentation and debate. I'm wondering if we ought to be looking towards a comfort break before too long, which you may have been planning to do anyway, in which case after the next item might be the best time, but obviously I'm open to suggestions from colleagues. Can I move the recommendations on Morgan Timber Yard, Knight Road, Strood? The recommendation approval subject to A, the applicant entering into a Section 106 agreement to secure items 1 to 9, conditions 1 to 9 on the Section 106 funding, and then B, conditions 1 to 32, condition 12 to be amended in accordance with the supplementary agenda to reflect the new National Planning Policy Framework, and condition 22 to be amended as set out in the supplementary agenda. I also note the planning officer's comments on possible grant funding for affordable housing, and I move all that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that seconded?
Seconded.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. Those for?
That's 13, Chair.
The application is therefore approved. We will now go for a short break. Thank you. Right, welcome back to tonight's Planning Committee. We now move on to agenda item 7, which is 18 Arethusa Road. Jonathan Simon will be presenting this application, so over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. This is an application at 18 Arethusa Road, and it's for the construction of an outbuilding to the rear together with a side access ramp. Here you can see the site outlined in red. It's located within Rochester, and then to the west of the site, east of the site, sorry, is Cityway. Here are the photographs of the site. The two top photos are the rear garden, and the one on the left is in the location of where the outbuilding would be, and the two photos at the bottom is a rear extension that was approved under a previous application and is currently under construction. Here you can see the existing and proposed site plans, and you can see that there is, in addition to the outbuilding, there's a couple of patio areas, one surrounding the outbuilding, and then one that's effectively attached to the previously approved extension. Here you can see the proposed floor plan. It's proposed that this outbuilding will be used as an annex, and a condition is recommended to ensure that the outbuilding is only occupied ancillary to the main dwelling and not occupied as a separate dwelling. Here are the proposed west and proposed east elevations. The proposed east elevation faces into the garden of the application site, and the west elevation faces onto the boundary with the adjacent neighbour at number 26. And here are the proposed north and south elevations. The north elevation faces the boundary with the properties on Bedgebury Close, and the south elevation faces onto the garden of the application site, and the application is recommended for approval as set out. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I now open the floor to members. Any members? No? Councillor Golvin.
Well, somebody's got to say something, otherwise we haven't got a proper debate. I'll take my sweet away. If you look at the map there, particularly if I had a look on the Google Maps, there seems to be all around that area large structures in the back gardens for various things. So the precedent's certainly there. So I don't even know why it's come to committee, because it seems to be such a common feature. And by the look of it, it's for an elderly parent or something, or I should imagine. So I can't see there's any problem with it personally.
Councillor Jones.
Yes, I agree with Councillor Golvin up to a point. I just wanted to ask the officer, clearly we have to consider what's in front of us, but in light of the comments by objectors about possible overlooking, was any consideration given to siting the outbuilding nearer to the main house? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So it's considered that the proposed location of the outbuilding, and I'll just take us to the proposed site plan here, in this location it causes the least impact to both the residents of the application site and surrounding sites as a whole. Obviously, wherever it's going to be, there's going to be an impact to someone or multiple people. But where it's positioned at the bottom of the garden, as it's quite common for outbuildings to do, it's positioned furthest away from the most used areas of people's gardens, which is typically those areas at the right nearest to where the building itself is. Typically, people tend to put patios there. As you can see from the site plan, there is one proposed here. And it's considered that this is a relatively modest proposal in comparison to some other outbuilding proposals that I've seen, or indeed what you can do under permitted development. In addition, the outbuilding is only 3 metres in height, so it's considered that any impacts would be minimal. Thank you.
Any other member? So I have a question myself. In the reports pack, it says that so it's by what percentage does the proposals exceed the 50% rule under Part 1, Class A, which is on page 61? that's mentioned. So how much does it exceed that by?
I don't have the exact figure to hand. However, whilst that is something under the permitted development rights, where this is a planning application, it's not, that 50% figure it isn't relevant, so to speak, because it's an application where it's considered on its own merits.
Right, okay, thank you. And also, do you know what the distance is from the rear of 31 Bedtree to the rear of this proposed outbuilding?
So, give me 2 seconds, I'll just look that up in the report. I believe it is mentioned. So it's between approximately 1.8 and 2.6 metres from the boundaries of the rear gardens on Bedtree Close.
From the boundary. So do you know how long that garden is in Bedtree? I'm just trying to...
I do not off the top of my head.
No, that's fine. It's only myself because about 4 doors up from me, we've had an annex built in one of the rear gardens, and being 4 doors up, it is still quite overpowering, even from my garden. So that's only what concerns me, because this is actually bigger than the one that's being built just up from me. So that's where, from my experience from having that's my concern. Councillor Peake.
Well, now you say that, I've been on the receiving end of a building built next door to me as well. So again, I don't want to be double standard because I thought it was way too big. It was inspected and I told it wasn't. In the report under the section saying design, it gives the measurements, 1.8 to 2.6, distance from the boundary, 3 metres in height. Arguably, this is not relevant. Just to put my mind at ease, what is the minimum, no, what's the maximum height a building can be in ratio to the minimum distance? I think it's that is the right way around, isn't it? In other words, that ratio between height and distance, what are those figures? I'm just curious to see whether this is close to that or not, please.
Sorry, Chair, can I just, I'm just trying to understand the question. Apologies, Councillor Peake.
I think your microphone's off, is it, or not?
Sorry. I'm thinking about the impact on the neighbours, and I can understand, like the Chair, about having a concern about something that even when it's within the perceived rules, guidance or whatever, can still seem to neighbours to be quite overbearing. So I'm curious to see how close this outbuilding is to the bare minimum that is acceptable, both in terms of height and distance.
Chair, thank you very much. I think it's one of, as Jonathan was saying earlier, we have looked at this and we've considered the amenities of all the residents around, not just one amenity, one resident, not just the resident at the back, the residents at the side. In terms of understanding that outbuildings are normal, as Councillor Galvin explained, both for annexes, both for outbuildings generally in terms of sheds and so on, but also in terms of home working, which is increasingly common. So we're increasingly seeing these delivered. If it was further towards the dwelling house, then it would have a greater impact on the neighbours either side. By pushing it to the back of the property there in terms of the gardens, it's the furthest from the back of those properties in Arethusa Road. And I appreciate the properties in the road to the rear have smaller gardens, but they've still got gardens which are, and I'm just looking at them on plan, I would imagine they're a minimum of 10 metres, maybe 11 metres. And then, as Jonathan says, you've got another 2 metres to this building. In terms of height, what the applicants have proposed and what we agree with is by having a flat roof or with just a slight slope to get that drainage, it can keep the height to what is normally the minimum for for an annex like this of 3 metres. So I'm not aware of any, if many, annexes which are lower than 3 metres. So 3 metres is probably the minimum you can get. As I said, it's been taken off the boundary by 2.6, but as close to that boundary as possible. So really trying to get a balance here in terms of minimising the impact, recognising, as the Chair says, there will be some impact, but let's keeping that as a minimum as possible, and that's what we've come up with.
Thank you. Any other member? No, I now move over to Vice Chair, Councillor Jones.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is the site at 18 Arethusa Road, Rochester. Recommendation is approval with conditions, which are 1 to 4 as set out. I so move. Thank you, Chair.
Is that seconded?
Seconded.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. Those for?
That's 13, Chair.
The application is therefore approved. Thank you. Right, we now move on to agenda item 8, which Councillor Mandarakis is going to speak on. So if you'd like to take your seat. Aaron Nichols will be presenting this application, so I move over to Aaron. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. This application seeks planning permission for the conversion of an existing 4-bedroom dwelling house to a 7-bedroom, 7-person HMO, together with the construction of an L-shaped dormer to the rear and the installation of roof lights to the front. This slide shows the site location, which is in northern Gillingham. Apologies. While I'm on this side, I should say as well, the surrounding street scene would fall with a locality predominantly formed of single household occupancies, although it is recognised that there is a retail unit on the junction of Selbourne Road and Baden Road, which is located here, which currently occupies as a landlord, like letting agency. And in the surrounding street scene, in the surrounding streets, there are a number of HMOs which have been marked on this map as blue dots in Barden Road, Roseberry Road and Garfield Road. This slide shows the existing property's front elevation alongside the existing floor plans, showing the property as a 4-bedroom house with 1 bedroom on the ground floor towards the rear and 3 bedrooms on the first floor. There is also a basement used for storage. This slide shows the proposed floor plans and proposed front and rear elevations. The proposals have been considered against the National Sky Space Standards, and all the bedrooms either exceed or meet the minimal requirements. And in addition, they offer adequate degree of natural light and afford suitable outlook. On the ground floor, the communal space would be shared amongst the residents, will provide a kitchen area and a separate dining area. This is considered to provide a suitable level of space for the preparation of food and leisure amenities and future occupants. The application site is considered to be in a sustainable location with amenities such as shops, green spaces, public transport, schools and colleges within approximately 10 to 15 minutes walking distances from the site. And in order to support the use of sustainable transport, the proposal features the provision of secure cycle storage via 1 space per bedroom in the rear garden area, and a condition is recommended to secure this. And this slide shows views around the street scene with images 1 and 2 showing the property in relation to the existing street scene looking towards the east and the west. Image 3 shows the rear elevations of the properties and the neighbouring properties, showing other properties with dormer extensions in their rear roofs, although smaller than the proposed. The rear access to the property is via a gated access, which can be seen on image 3. It is just in between the 2 garages here where the lamppost is. This is a secured and locked gate. And image 4 shows a wider view of the street scene, with image 5 showing the real estate agents on the junction of Baden and Selbourne Road. The proposal is considered to be acceptable in regards to the design, amenity and highways terms, and subject to the conditions restricting the occupancy level to 7, and the provision of secure cycle storage is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Now go over to Ward Member Councillor Mandarakis, who has 5 minutes to speak. Thank you.
So thank you all for allowing me to speak today. I've been contacted by numerous residents of Selbourne Road and Hamilton, which also backs onto it. So I wanted to ensure that their concerns were considered. So whilst I can understand the need for additional housing, it does need to be mitigated against the amenities and concerns of current residents. The most pressing of these is parking, which in Selbourne and the surrounding area is already at capacity, with more permits than available spaces being issued. I don't know if it can be answered here, but given how stretched they are, would new tenants even be able to be issued parking permits? I'm aware the developer has stated that they expect most of the tenants to cycle, but I do cycle through that area of Gillingham regularly. Find it hard to believe that many people would choose that over a car, surrounded by really steep hills and tiny roads with tightly packed cars, and there's endless risks of those car doors being opened on you, and those roads don't give you enough space to give proper clearance to the car doors. Which then would lead on to the security of those cycles and the surrounding properties. I've personally had 3 bikes stolen from different locations within a half-mile radius of this property, so I'm unconvinced that an external bike shed would be sufficient security, and residents are concerned that the increased traffic in the alleyway would lead to less security for all their properties, as people may forget to lock it. The alleyway has previously been a hotspot for various types of ASB, so if it is approved, I wondered if the developer could be asked to make the alleyway auto-locking rather than padlock locked, either with a fob or a Yale type lock. And residents are also concerned about the potential for noise pollution. House of multiple occupancy typically involves a larger number of residents, many of whom will have different schedules and lifestyles. This increased foot traffic, social activity, and potentially loud gatherings could significantly disturb the peace of the adjoining properties. These homes have long enjoyed a quiet residential environment, and the introduction of multiple tenants would undoubtedly cause undue disruption, particularly during later hours. The proposed dormer window could also lead to a restriction in natural light for neighbouring properties, especially those to either side of 32. I struggle to visualise it from the drawing. Sorry, I've lost my place. I struggle to visualise it from the drawing in the plans, but I wondered if the likely shadow cost has been assessed at different times of day, to different sun angles. These homes are also ideal first-time buys. If this is approved, could I ask that the developers are asked to keep the internal layout in a format that makes conversion to a standard dwelling non-cumbersome and something that could happen if the property is sold? The outside space is also very small for the use of 7 households. Whilst it's unlikely they would all use it at the same time, I find it hard to imagine more than 2 or 3 people using it unless they were actively socialising together. And then finally, the property would be unique within the street. Whilst the current design and character of number 32 fit well with the surrounding homes, and these plans don't alter that materially, the nature of a HMO could disrupt the cohesive nature of the street. The introduction of multiple tenants in one house will likely lead to a higher turnover of tenants, whereas this area of Gillingham is known for the fact that owners tend to stay in their properties for long periods and have a sense of community amongst each other that's forged through knowing their neighbours. So in conclusion, whilst residents recognise the need for additional housing in the area, this particular proposal for a HMO at number 32 doesn't adequately address the concerns of the surrounding community, those being noise, natural light, parking, security, green space and the overall impact on the street. I urge the Planning Committee to consider these points carefully and reject this proposal in favour of a solution that respects the needs of both future tenants and existing residents alike. Thank you all.
Thank you, Councillor Mandarakis. I now open the floor to members. Any member? Councillor Etheridge.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the councillor from the area for giving us a quick update. I personally cannot support this application for a number of reasons. Firstly, I don't think this house is actually suitable for an HMO for 7 people, possibly an HMO for 4 or 3, but certainly not 7. And it's ridiculous to assume that there will only ever be a maximum of 7 people in this property because they will all have guests. So it's potentially 14 plus, trying to squeeze in this garden area that can actually accommodate 2 or 3. There's nowhere in the application that states where the waste of 7 people is going to be stored until it's picked up by the relevant waste pickup people. And there's nowhere in there that states very clearly how they're going to maintain the property in terms of damp. Because if you've got 7 individuals in there who've washed their clothes trying to dry them, then you're going to end up with a house that's just full of damp and mould. And I think it's just absolutely ridiculous, this proposal coming forward. So on those bases, I'm not going to support this.
Councillor Golvin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I must admit, I've got a lot of sympathy for the local councillor and also for Councillor Etheridge's point of view. What worries me, yet whilst all the reasons are valid reasons for not wanting it, are they something that could stand up to a planning inquiry? And I feel that they wouldn't. And what worries me is we've all had the opportunity to read letters from the Deputy Prime Minister in the last few weeks, where she laid it out very, very clearly that if planning committees voted against an officer's recommendation, and that subsequently was overturned by the planning inspectorate, not that there could be costs awarded against them, but you will get costs awarded against you. So what worries me is there's a bigger question of why we're here anyway if our rights to determine planning applications are taken away from us. But in this case, I don't think, whilst yes, there's all very good reasons for refusal there, I can't see that they are sufficiently bad to warrant going against the officer's recommendation, because it worries me that we as a council could end up with considerable costs against us if we start turning planning applications down. So I've got to say, I'm very, very reluctantly, it is reluctantly, I'm going to vote for this, unfortunately.
Thank you. Councillor Hammond-Isheh.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate the sentiments coming from across the bench there. However, we need to have some fortitude, I believe. This is excessive. This is packing them in a very confined space. If we set precedents on that road, and the neighbours and so forth continue to do this 7 extension HMO situation there, you're just going to get a slum. You're going to get a slum. On the planning merits that we have to consider, I just think it's an overdevelopment. I think they need to strip that back down. They don't need to have 7. If there was 3, I could understand it, but for me, this is more profiteering than it is providing safe, adequate housing for residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to come back on that, Aaron? Thank you.
Yeah, hi, I'll come back. Just on this, so through changes through the General Permitted Development Order in 2015, this did allow for the conversion of C3 houses basically into small HMOs of up to 6 people. So as part of this application, I have considered what could be done under what would be permitted development, right? So, they can convert it into a small HMO along with adding a dormer to the rear, as long as it doesn't breach their numbers. In regards to the other comments around waste, there are bins and recycling bins proposed, which are on this dwelling to the front of the property, which are in line with other HMOs that I've dealt with. The secure cycle storage to the rear, there is a condition attached for it, which the information will be sent to us and it will be agreed by our transport consultants. It will be safe and it will be secure. I don't know if we can do anything in regards to changing the lock or anything in regards to the gateway, as that would be outside of the owner's land. And in regards to overlooking, conditions are on to restrict on the side elevation of the L-shaped dormer for obscured glazing.
Thank you, Dave. Do you want to come back on that as well?
Chair, thank you. Just to build on what Aaron has said, I think we all understand the concerns that the ward councillor has quite eloquently put, and other councillors have spoken about. And indeed, the policy in the adopted local plan reflects a lot of those concerns that members have. But as Aaron has pointed out, permitted development rights have changed since that policy was drafted, and it can be converted into a small HMO and have those extensions without planning permission. So you get up to 6, and then the question then is, does the 7th then cause, take it too far in terms of that impact? And in order to answer that, I'm going to answer Councillor Golvin's question, which is, what chance have we got on appeal? And members, you have refused similar schemes elsewhere in the authority, similar properties, and they've gone to appeal, and the appeals have been allowed, not with costs being awarded against us, but the appeals have been allowed, and the inspectors on those have said, the point that Aaron has said, it can be done with up to 6 people without requiring planning permission, so we're only looking at 1 additional. The internal amenities are fine. The inspectors have always said there wouldn't be a justifiable reason to refuse in terms of impact on comings and goings by 1 extra person, and it can be conditioned in terms of the 7 people. I do appreciate the point that Councillor Etheridge has said in terms of there being visitors, but this is about people actually living there. And what inspectors have also said is, well, you get a family in there with adult children, parties, the impact will be no different to what could take place if it was in a single family accommodation. So those are the views that have been expressed by inspectors. I do respect the points that the councillors, and particularly the ward councillor, has said, but that's just how it's been. They've been considered on appeal. The only other thing I would say, and I know that we need to consider this as just in planning, but the applicants here, they've got a number of other HMOs in the area, and I have been to see them, and in terms of quality of HMOs, they deliver a quality which is at the high range of HMOs. So if we're going to have an HMO here, these are probably the right people to deliver it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dave. Councillor Peake.
Thank you for that reassurance. Again, this is difficult for me because I've got completely contradictory thoughts on this. One, I'm very pro the need to get housing, but on the other hand, I'm very wary about so many people being crammed in. So when I immigrated back to England, I was homeless. I was really pleased to get 1 room in a 5-bedroom property. My goodness, it was a challenge to about cramped shared accommodation. Saying this without swearing, which is quite an achievement. What concerns me also is the assumption that is made. I'm just referring to, on the planning outline about transport, which I think it says there will be no detrimental effect. It also says on page 70 about how proximate, proximate to public transport links, green space and shops. So the property I was in Gittyer Park, which is a posh area next to Romford, and it had a lovely park, and it had buses, and it had walking distance to the train. But me, like most of us, still had a car. And I'm not adverse to walking, but this assumption, because you're near these places, that you're not going to have a car, it's just not reality quite often. You can't just take that for granted, and that is something that concerns me, that this could have, this assumption there seems to be there will not be a detrimental effect. That is my concern. Thank you.
Any other member? Councillor Jones.
Yeah, just one quick question. I'm not sure whether it's relevant or not, but a lot of members have spoken about cramped development. Presumably officers are satisfied about the size of the bedrooms which are proposed.
Yeah, I'll go back to Aaron. I believe they are, if not bigger.
Thank you, Chairperson. Yes, all of the rooms meet or exceed the requirements of the National Sky Space Standards, which are actually above and beyond what's required by central government for HMOs.
Any other member? No. So I really struggle with this one because personally, sorry, Pete. Yeah, Pete, do you want to come back on that? Thank you.
Sorry, no, thank you. Just to sort of add a bit more to Aaron's point on the living standards within HMOs, which I think
I think it's something we're very look at very meticulously in terms of these accommodations, because I think, as Councillor Peake's very well articulated, they do serve a very useful and beneficial sort of market for those that are looking for accommodation. But equally, I think, as Councillor Hammondishy said, we don't want to be creating sort of slum accommodation, and it's striking that balance. We had one recently in Chatham where there was a 10-bedroom HMO proposed, where we had concerns about the overall living accommodation in terms of the room sizes and the size of the communal space within that. That application, we came down on the side of refusal for that, for 10 people. And it did go to the planning appeal, as I think Councillor Etheridge was concerned at earlier, and it was allowed at appeal in November, just gone. So a very recent appeal decision where the inspector concluded that the space, particularly the communal space, was adequate for 10 people, and that was contrary to our view as officers, and obviously a single appeal decision is not one to base a policy or a decision-making criteria on, but it does give an indication of the inspectorate's views on these matters, particularly when you're looking at, obviously in the case before you tonight, one person greater than what's allowed under permitted development. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pete. Oh, Councillor Field.
Just a very quick one. It might be useful if the members of the committee potentially have a briefing session on HMOs, because I know that's an issue that comes in a lot of our wards, just to understand some of those areas and just to express, what our community concerns are, and to see if we can influence policy as it goes forward in the local plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I've listened to everyone's comments. Personally, I don't like HMOs because I do think they are quite cramped with a lot of people in a small area. But I can't really see, apart from it being one over the 6, any reasons for refusal on this. And I do think that we would lose at appeal, which we can't afford to do as a council. So therefore, reluctantly, I will be voting for this application. Now over to Vice Chair, Councillor Jones.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm assuming the clerk will have logged that request for a member presentation on HMOs, so I'll just concentrate on the recommendation. 32 Selbourne Road, Gillingham. Recommendation is approval with conditions 1 to 5 attached as set out in the report.
Is that seconded?
Seconded. Seconded.
Those for?
That's 6, Chair.
Those against?
That's 6, Chair.
Right, thank you. Seeing as though it was 6 for, 6 against, I therefore have the casting a vote, and my vote still remains as for. Therefore, the application is approved. So moving on to agenda item 9, 21 to 23 New Roads. Peter Hockney, the service manager, will be presenting this application. So over to you, Pete.
Thank you, Chair. If I just get the plans up. This is an application for a variation of the Section 106 to
a permission that's already had it granted. So the photos and plans are there essentially as a reminder only. The application was granted for a total of 32 homes, 8 of which were to be on-site affordable homes. The applicant has sought a provider for these on-site provision of affordable units, but there were no registered providers who were willing to take on 8 of the 32 homes. That was discussed with colleagues in housing who expressed sort of concern about that, but also worked with them to approach the full suite of providers, and they are satisfied that the applicant's done all they can to provide to find a provider for these units. So we're in a position where the applicant's tried and hasn't been able to find anyone to take on the affordable units on site, and therefore we're looking at, in lieu of on-site provision, an off-site financial contribution. So to that end, a viability assessment was undertaken by the council's appointed consultant. So it was undertaken by him rather than someone appointed by the applicant, and as a result of that assessment, it's deemed that an off-site contribution of £214,500 would be provided in lieu of the on-site provision. So the recommendation is that a deed of variation to the 106 be undertaken in those terms to provide the off-site contribution in lieu of on-site provision. The application would normally be dealt with under delegated powers, but is being referred to committee because Planning Committee made the original decision on the application. Thank you.
Thank you. I now open the floor to members. Any members? Councillor Golvin.
There does seem to be a problem at the moment for developers to get a registered provider on board. I mean, one of the reasons I've read in the press is that a lot of the bigger ones have got such a huge outlay in replacing cladding on their sort of or present housing stock that they haven't got the money to invest. Can I make a suggestion that if, I think this is a sensible way out of this thing to take the money, we've got a scheme of our own just very, very close to this development up at the Upper Mount, and the Upper Mount scheme includes accommodation for care leavers, which is something which I think so we should be doing better as authority, because certainly those members who've sat on the corporate parenting board will know that a lot of our young people who've been leaving care have been put into quite substandard accommodation, and it's it's something that is not right. I think we should, as we are corporate parents, we should try and make as we would with our own children, to make the best provision for them that is possible. So if officers could take that one on board, because I'd really like to see that scheme underway, and that, for members' information, is the some of the affordable for the Mountbatten House scheme, because some of the affordable will be provided within Mountbatten House and the extension that goes on the end of it at the Brook end, but there wasn't sufficient space available within that site, so to meet the numbers that are required, because it's quite large numbers. I think well over 100 units within the new Mountbatten House with this extension. So the Upper Mount site was looked at to take some of that. So I think that would be a very good use. And providing, I've got no reason to believe it isn't the case, that provision at the Upper Mount is, some of it is going towards looked after care leavers. I think that would be a very good thing to do, personally. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Galvin. Any other member? Councillor Peake.
So when I first looked at the proposal, the owners have been unable to find a registered provider to take on their approved affordable housing provision. My initial reaction to that was go away and try harder and come back when you've found somebody. But on the other hand, it is what it is. But to me, all this evening really highlights how useful this meeting is when you hear the to and fro and the different things that are said. And it is generally, it's not until that point do I make my mind up. If we are confident that this road has been travelled to its end, or whatever the right terminology is, and we've got to a point where it's not going to happen, then we've got to accept it is what it is. But it just seems such a shame. How often does this happen? That's my question. Thank you.
Over to you, Dave.
Chair, thank you very much. I think Councillor Galvin summed it up a lot. There is a big issue at the moment in terms of delivery of affordable homes, and that's because registered providers are really struggling to take on affordable homes through Section 106s because of the money that they did set aside to deal with cladding, to deal with damp problems. So at the moment there is a big problem out there. We are pretty much the most forward-thinking council in Kent, so I'm told, in relation to trying to find solutions for this, which, as you will have gathered from discussion earlier tonight and at other committees, could mean taking it out of Section 106s and looking for grant funding. Now, I heard Pete whisper just while you were asking the question, Councillor Peake. We don't just accept what applicants say to us. We really push them. We consult with our housing team. We go to the registered providers. We say, well, why aren't you taking these? So we don't just accept what applicants say. Sometimes those negotiations can take quite a while. If I'm thinking about Chatham Waters, which is the Peel development, Peel originally came to us and said that they couldn't get a registered provider. We didn't accept that. We went to registered providers, they explained to us their problems. We kept pushing, we kept looking for solutions. In the end, after 2 years, we managed to deliver 25% affordable homes on site at Chatham Waters. So I think it just, we don't, to give you that reassurance, Councillor Peake, we really do search for solutions on site. And it's only if we run out of solutions that we then look at contributions, which you have done here. And then in terms of Councillor Galvin's point, Adrian, I will speak to our to MDC and to our housing team as to how best to spend this as close as possible to this site, which could be up amount. But I'm reassured that I will take that suggestion forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members? No? Right, so yeah, it is disappointing that yet again we're losing out on affordable housing on this site. But you know, it's one of those things, it is what it is. There's not a lot we can do about that at this point. So therefore, I feel that the only option is to support this. Therefore, I will be supporting it. So over to you, Councillor Jones.
Thank you very much, Chair. 21 to 23 New Road, Chatham. Recommendation is that a deed of variation be agreed to the Section 106 entered into as part of planning consent MC/18/0715 to remove requirement for the provision of affordable housing on site and secure a commuted sum of £214,500 to provide the affordable housing off-site. Thank you, Chair. I so move.
Is that seconded?
Seconded.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. Those for?
That's 13, Chair.
The application is therefore approved. That is now the end of tonight's planning committee. Thank you to officers and members.